Ladies and gentlemen, let us begin where many of us have stood, on the trembling edge of a hospital bed, beside a grave, in the deafening silence after devastating news. In such moments, a question surges up from the soul like a storm-tossed wave. Why pain? Why does a good God, if there is one, allow it? Pain is not proof of God's absence, but his presence misunderstood. At first glance, this idea may seem contradictory. How can the presence of pain raw, bitter, and sometimes utterly overwhelming signal anything other than abandonment? If we associate God with love, mercy, and protection, then the presence of suffering might appear to contradict his very nature. This was the initial struggle of many thinkers throughout history, including C.S.Lewis, who once argued against the existence of God precisely because of the cruelty he observed in the world. And yet, Lewis's intellectual and spiritual journey took a remarkable turn when he began to understand that pain does not negate God's presence, but reveals it in a deeply mysterious and even redemptive way. C.S. Lewis famously wrote, "God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Pain, then, becomes a kind of divine language. It is disruptive, uncomfortable, and often unbearable, but that is precisely why it cannot be ignored. Unlike pleasure, which can lull us into complacency, or success, which can inflate the ego, pain breaks through our defenses. It demands attention. In this way, Lewis suggests, pain may be the one thing powerful enough to crack open the walls we build around our hearts. Those walls often consist of pride, self-sufficiency, and distraction, the belief that we can get through life on our own, without reference to a higher power. Pain dismantles those illusions. Now, consider this from the Islamic perspective. Islam, too, does not interpret the existence of suffering as a sign of God's absence. Quite the opposite, it sees trials, pain, and hardship as part of the divine plan to awaken the soul, test the heart, and guide the human being toward greater awareness and submission to God. In the Quran, it is stated, "And we will surely test you with something of fear and hunger, and a loss of wealth and lives and fruits, but give good tidings to the patient." 2, 155. The verse acknowledges suffering not as an anomaly, but as an essential part of human existence. The key, Islam teaches, is not to deny or escape pain, but to respond to it with patience sabr and faith iman. This perspective does not require blind acceptance. Rather, it invites deep trust in a wisdom that transcends our limited understanding. Pain is not framed as a cosmic mistake, nor a punishment for every misstep. Sometimes it is a purification, sometimes it is preparation, and sometimes it is a divine call to return, reflect, and reorient one's life. In this sense, what may feel like abandonment may actually be intimacy in disguise. God is not distant in your suffering. He is near in a way that your comfort may never reveal. C.S. Lewis came to see pain as something that forces us to confront the truths we would rather avoid. In comfort, it is easy to ignore the deeper questions of life. But in suffering, we ask, why am I here? What is the purpose of all this? Where do I go when there's nowhere left to run? These questions are not obstacles to faith, they are its beginning. And perhaps it is for this reason that Lewis, who lost his beloved wife to cancer, did not abandon God in his grief. He wrestled with him, he cried out to him, but ultimately he drew nearer. Pain, then, became not the end of faith, but the means by which it deepened. Islam carries a similar message. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught that even the prick of a thorn expiates a believer's sins. What does this mean? It means that no pain is wasted in the divine economy. Everything, even the smallest discomfort, carries weight, meaning, and spiritual consequence. The believer is encouraged to see pain not just as suffering, but as investment and opportunity for growth, refinement, and forgiveness. God in Islam is not a remote architect watching a struggle from afar. He is *al-lat, if *the subtle, *ar-woman, *the most merciful, and *al-hakim, *the most wise. These names, these attributes, are especially relevant in times of pain. They assure the believer that God is present, active, and wise in his decrees, even when the wisdom is hidden from us. In both Lewis's thought and Islamic theology, the experience of pain becomes transformative. But this transformation requires a shift in perspective. If one sees pain only as chaos, then faith becomes impossible. But if one sees pain as communication, then even the harshest trials carry meaning. Lewis described pain as a divine shout. Islam echoes this by describing hardship as a divine sign. In the Quran, life itself is described as a test. He who created death and life to test you as to which of you is best indeed. 67. Life is not meant to be easy, it is meant to be meaningful. The misunderstanding of God's presence in pain often comes from expecting that divine love will look like human comfort, but God's love is not indulgent, it is purifying. Just as a surgeon may cause pain to remove a tumor, so too may God allow suffering to heal deeper spiritual diseases: arrogance, heedlessness, injustice, selfishness. Pain reveals what is fragile, yes, but it also reveals what is eternal. It breaks the surface to show us what lies beneath. This is why pain should not be equated with God's absence. On the contrary, pain may be the moment of God's closest nearness, not emotionally perhaps, but spiritually. For in pain we become more honest, more open, and more capable of receiving the truth. It is in pain that many turn to prayer, seek forgiveness, rediscover purpose, and cry out in ways they never did when life was smooth. That cry, that pure, unfiltered call from the depths of the soul, is one of the most powerful moments of connection between a human being and the divine. Lewis understood this as the refining nature of suffering. Islam describes it as purification and elevation. They are two languages describing the same truth. Pain has meaning not always the kind we seek, but always the kind we need. So, when pain strikes, when the floor beneath us gives way, and the silence of heaven feels unbearable, it may not be a sign that God has turned away. It may be, instead, the moment he has drawn closest. Not to punish, not to abandon, but to awaken, refine, and remind us of who we are and, more importantly, who he is. Suffering strips away illusion and reveals the soul's true state. This is a truth echoed across the great traditions of faith, and nowhere is it more powerfully articulated than in the works of CSLewis and the teachings of Islam. It is a paradox that suffering, which often appears to us as meaningless chaos, may in fact serve a deeply meaningful function to reveal who we truly are beneath the layers of distraction, ego, and comfort. It is not that pain creates something new within us, rather, it unmasks what was already there. It exposes the condition of the soul, sometimes wounded, sometimes proud, sometimes yearning, but always in need of something greater than itself. C.S.Lewis was no stranger to personal suffering. He lost his mother at an early age, endured the horrors of World War I, and later lost his beloved wife, Joy Davidman, to cancer. He did not arrive at his conclusions about suffering from a theoretical distance. Instead, his insights were born from the fires of his own grief. In his reflections, Lewis observed that much of what we think of as security or stability in life is little more than illusion. Health, wealth, relationships, all are subject to sudden change. Yet we cling to them as if they are ultimate. We build our sense of identity and worth on things that time and fate can easily take away. It is only when those things are stripped away when suffering comes like a thief in the night, that we realize how fragile our foundations truly are. This is why Lewis said, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. Pain is not just an alarm, it is a revealer. It shows us where we have placed our trust. It reveals whether our hearts have been anchored in temporary comforts or in something eternal. In comfort, a person may appear grateful, humble, and spiritually alive, but comfort does not test those virtues. Pain does. Pain unmasks the reality beneath the surface. When suffering strikes, the soul is laid bare. There are no masks left. A person's response in suffering, bitterness or patience, despair or hope, anger or surrender becomes a mirror of the soul's true condition. Islam presents a deeply resonant view of this same reality. The Quran is filled with stories of prophets who faced tremendous trials: Noah and the flood, Abraham and the fire, Joseph and the well, Moses and Pharaoh, Mary and her labor, and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon them all, who endured mockery, exile, war, and loss. These stories are not just historical records, they are spiritual mirrors. They teach us that the path of truth and closeness to God is not free from suffering, but paved with it. Why? Because suffering is the means by which the soul is refined, its sincerity tested, and its dependence on God made real. In Islam, suffering is not viewed as arbitrary, it is part of the divine design. The Quran tells us, do the people think that they will be left to say, we believe and they will not be tested, 29:2. The question is rhetorical and profound. It challenges the idea that belief is merely a verbal statement or a cultural identity. True belief is not proven in ease, but in hardship. It is when the comforts are removed, when prayers seem unanswered, when life feels unbearable, that the soul's true reliance on God is revealed. This is why the Islamic tradition places such a high value on sabr, patience, tawakkul, trust in God, and rida, contentment with God's decree. These qualities are not born in comfort, they are forged in hardship. A person who has never suffered may speak of trust in God, but it is the one who clings to God in the darkness without answers, without relief, who truly knows what trust means. Lewis, too, understood that suffering can strip us of illusions not only about the world, but about ourselves. He wrote in the problem of pain, the human spirit will not even begin to try to surrender self-will as long as all seems to be well with it. In other words, it is only when our plans fail, when our strength collapses, that we begin to truly surrender. The illusion of self-sufficiency is a powerful one. We live as if we are in control, as if our health, our relationships, and our future are entirely within our command. Suffering breaks that illusion. It humbles us, and in that humility we become more receptive to grace. In Islam, this humility before God is central. The Arabic word for Islam itself means surrender or submission, but surrender is not passive. It is not defeatist. It is the conscious acknowledgement that we are not the authors of our fate. It is the recognition that there is a wisdom greater than ours and a will more perfect than our own. When the believer suffers, he or she is reminded that everything ease and hardship comes from God. This awareness is not meant to paralyze, but to empower. It shifts the believer's focus from outward control to inward resilience. This perspective radically transforms how we view suffering. Instead of asking, "Why me?" the believer asks, "What is this revealing in me?" Instead of questioning God's love, the soul begins to see pain as a form of divine attention, not always comforting, but always meaningful. In that sense, both Lewis and Islam teach that suffering is not just something we endure. It is something that shapes us, sharpens us, and, in some mysterious way, draws us closer to the truth. Suffering reveals whether we worship God or the gifts He gives. It shows whether our faith was conditional or unconditional, whether we loved God for who He is or for what He gives. And in that revelation, though it may come through tears and heartbreak, the soul finds its most authentic posture, bowed in humility, stripped of pride, and open to grace. To say that suffering strips away illusion is not to say that suffering is easy or that its pain is not real. It is real, it wounds deeply, but the wound itself becomes a window, a place where the soul can look beyond the material and the temporal and catch a glimpse of the eternal. Lewis and Islam do not glorify suffering for its own sake. Rather, they call us to see suffering as a crucible, a forge in which falsehood is burned away and truth is revealed. In the end, suffering may not give us the answers we crave, but it can give us something even greater, clarity. It clarifies what matters, it reveals what lasts, and most importantly, it reveals the state of the soul, not to shame us, but to invite us to grow, to change, and to return to the one who created us. So when pain comes, as it inevitably does, we would do well to remember, it is not just something to get through, it is something to listen to, something to learn from, because in its fire we may just discover who we really are and, more importantly, who we are meant to become. Pain purifies and elevates. It is a path, not a punishment. This principle, though difficult to embrace in moments of deep suffering, carries transformative power. When rightly understood, pain ceases to be seen as a meaningless interruption in life's journey and becomes instead a central part of the journey itself, perhaps even its most meaningful stretch. Both C.S. Lewis and the Islamic tradition offer this perspective, though in their own distinctive languages. Where Lewis speaks of pain as God's tool for soul shaping, Islam views it as a test that refines the heart and lifts the believer in spiritual rank. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "We are not necessarily doubting that God will do the best for us. We are wondering how painful the best will turn out to be." In this single sentence, he captured the tension many believers feel. We trust in God's wisdom in theory, but when suffering enters our lives, when our loved ones fall ill, when we lose our livelihoods, when we are betrayed, broken, or bereaved, we begin to question the method by which that wisdom unfolds. Lewis's insight does not deny that pain hurts. It acknowledges the hurt, while suggesting that the very best God has for us often passes through painful transformation. That which is easiest for us is not always best for us. Pain, according to Lewis, is a tool God uses to chisel away at our flaws, not to harm, but to heal. He draws a memorable analogy. We are like blocks of stone out of which God, the sculptor, is carving the form of his Son. The blows of his chisel, Lewis wrote, which hurt us so much, are what make us perfect. What an image! It is not easy to accept that pain can be part of a loving process, but this is exactly what Lewis asks us to consider. God is not indifferent to our suffering. In fact, it is because He loves us that He allows it, for without it we might remain stuck in our comfortable imperfections, unaware of the deeper beauty we are meant to embody. Islam approaches the subject from a different angle, but arrives at a similar truth. The Quran is clear, asterisk, indeed, with hardship comes ease, asterisk 94:6. The verse does not say after hardship, it says asterisk with asterisk, hardship comes ease. This implies that pain and mercy, suffering and growth coexist. Hardship is not a detour away from God's mercy, but often the very context in which His mercy is most deeply felt. In Islamic tradition, suffering is understood to have purifying effects on the soul. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "No fatigue, nor disease, nor sorrow, nor sadness, nor hurt, nor distress befalls a Muslim, even if it were the prick he receives from a thorn, but that Allah expiates some of his sins for that." Bukhari and Muslim, this hadith illustrates a striking concept. Every ounce of pain, even something as minor as a thorn, serves a purpose. Not a single moment of suffering is wasted. Pain cleanses. It washes away the dust of sin and forgetfulness. It brings the heart back to its original posture of humility and dependence on God. Just as soap stings but cleans, suffering hurts, but it also heals in unseen ways. Beyond purification, pain in Islam also elevates the believer. The more one bears patiently, the higher one is raised in spiritual rank. This is not abstract theology, it is lived reality. Throughout Islamic history, the greatest saints, scholars, and prophets endured the heaviest burdens. They were not elevated in spite of their suffering, but through it. Consider the example of Prophet Job, who endured years of illness, poverty, and loss, yet never wavered in his trust in God. His patience became legendary, and God not only restored his health and blessings, but honored him as an example for all time. The elevation that comes through suffering is not always visible to others. Sometimes the one who suffers most may seem the least successful by worldly standards, but from the perspective of faith, every moment of patient endurance becomes a step up the ladder toward closeness with God. The soul becomes lighter, freer, and more aligned with its purpose. And while the body may be bent under the weight of life's trials, the spirit is being raised to heights it could never reach through comfort alone. Lewis, too, recognized that the deepest transformations often happen in the shadows of hardship. In The Problem of Pain, he noted that while God may speak through joys, he shapes us most powerfully through pain. For Lewis, pain was a divine scalpel, a sharp instrument, yes, but one wielded by a skilled and loving surgeon. Without it, we might never face the parts of ourselves we prefer to avoid, our pride, our selfishness, our false securities. Pain strips these away. It exposes our wounds not to shame us, but to invite healing, and through this healing, we become more like the people we were created to be. One of the remarkable similarities between Lewis's Christian view and Islam's teachings is the idea that pain is never pointless. Whether it is allowed for correction, purification, or elevation, pain serves a purpose, and more than that, it is accompanied by divine presence. In Islam, Allah is called Al-Latif the subtle, the gentle. Even in the most intense suffering, God's gentleness is at work. It may not be immediately visible, but it surrounds the believer like unseen arms, catching every tear, measuring every sigh. In that belief lies tremendous strength. Lewis expressed something similar when he said, "When all your wishes are granted, many of your dreams will be destroyed. The things we think will make us happy, ease, success, comfort often do not." True joy, he suggested, is found not in the absence of pain, but in the presence of meaning. Pain becomes bearable, even transformative, when we believe it is not random, when we understand it as part of a divine process, an unseen curriculum designed for our growth. That is the difference between seeing pain as punishment and seeing it as a path. Punishment implies rejection, a path implies guidance. If we view suffering as punishment alone, we may feel abandoned by God. But if we understand it as a path, a painful but purposeful journey, then we see it as a sign of God's concern, not his absence. In this view, pain is not the closing of a door, but the opening of a deeper one, an invitation to become more sincere, more resilient, more compassionate, and more attuned to the divine. In both Lewis's writings and Islamic teaching, then, pain is not where meaning ends, it's where the deepest meaning often begins. It is through pain that we are purified of illusions, elevated in spirit, and drawn closer to the one who created us. Though we may resist it, question it, and even cry out against it, pain, when seen through the lens of faith, becomes a kind of grace, not the kind we ask for, but the kind we desperately need.